whether it takes them 2 years to get the hang of it or that kid catches on, you got to be patient with all them and got to be loving, to all them boys and girls that are wrestling in your club because, they're in a different atmosphere, different sport. Mm-hmm. A lot of them never had to do a sport that's them against somebody else.
Right. They're
all used to team sports, and once it's a one-on-one, it's a whole different lifestyle.
I got that dog in me, yeah. Turn me up. Big energy, got the crowd going up. I got that dog in me.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Wrestle podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Brenton, and today I am joined by a special guest, Kevin Dillon. So how are you doing today, Kevin?
Real good.
Good. I'm glad to have you here. Why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
I'm Kevin Dillon. I've been involved in USA Wrestling for 34 years now. Was always in Windy City Wrestlers Club, and I got out about 3 years ago. I'm still active on the state board, even though my position doesn't require a lot of activity. I'm still involved and just can't quite get out of it yet.
I definitely get that. Did you start the Windy City Wrestling Club, or was it already a club before?
I did not. We were at the boys' club when the boys started wrestling, and we were downtown there by K2 Radio in the old Boys and Girls Club for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And then we moved, I can't remember what year, to Kelly Walsh and became more or less a feeder program to them, and our club just took off and went after that. We had outstanding numbers for a lot of years and did really well and coached thousands of kids, I think. Maybe 1,000 anyway.
What made you start wanting to coach wrestling?
I wrestled in high school and wasn't very successful ever, but Nick was 5 years old and we decided to get him into it. And back then at the boys' club, it was pretty hectic, probably 100 kids rolling around in there. We had to roll the mats out every night and get ready, and then they split them into groups. And Terry Dye and Leonard Meisinger and Mark Bretz were probably the three coaches that were in charge of all that back in the day when I first started. And I just kind of sat back for 2 or 3 days and watched and listened, and then I couldn't take it anymore, and I got involved and never stepped off the mat after that.
Love it. So how long were you with Windy City?
This is my 34th year, so 30 years in the club, and then I stepped down for some health issues, and I was always a firm believer if a coach couldn't be in there practicing with their kids, maybe they shouldn't be coaching anymore. And as my health started to deteriorate some, I decided it was time to get out, and I coached another year, even though I didn't really run practices.
Right.
But I always said, like I said before, if I can't be in there coaching, I probably shouldn't be a coach anymore. And I had a lot of pushback saying, oh, you can still coach. And I still consider myself one of the best coaches in the state, but it got old after a while, and my kids had been out of it for about 10 years. You get all these group of kids that you want to get through, into high school, and it just kept going and going. And finally one day I just said, I've had enough. And Angela Berry took over the club then and did real well. And I know their numbers went down, and then Philip Young took over and started running the club. And I hear that his numbers are really up again, so that's really good.
Yeah, they've got a lot of little kids on that team, so it's good to see those numbers growing up for them.
Right. There was a lot of, as we grew, there were more and more clubs that became active in Casper. And I was always a firm believer. I still believe that, no matter what club you're in, you're always going to have two sides to a club, a clan of people here and a clan of people there that kind of hang out. And I tried to kind of dissolve that and make everybody feel welcome and well known. And, as parents got frustrated maybe with myself or other coaches or didn't like them coaching, then they, ventured out, whether they went to the Colts or the Casper Wrestling Club or Browns Club. Everybody had a lot of choices to do. So at times I took that personal when kids would quit.
Right.
And I would think, gosh, I can't believe that. But they would go and you just have to watch them, at a tournament. And then I always had to make a remark that they could have done a lot better if they would have stayed with us.
Yeah.
Whether that was right or not, I was always pretty good with trying to get the last word in to make myself or the club feel good.
Got to take those a little bit personal sometimes because it's a passionate sport and you get
Right.
invested in these kids and
Yeah.
you do so much for them as a coach that sometimes I don't think that they realize what you do.
Right.
So, I mean, it's kind of hard not to take things personal like that. So I definitely see that aspect of it. When you joined the Windy City, what kind of things did you implement or change or make different when you started the club?
As we grew bigger and bigger, I started to watch a lot of the clubs in the state as we went to a tournament every weekend and tried to pick up different coaching strategies and would talk to different coaches on how they ran their clubs and their practices and whether they had 100 kids, as we did a lot of times, we'd have to split times and more experienced one for an hour and a half and younger kids maybe for an hour. So it was kind of hectic at times, trying to please everybody. And I was always a people pleaser and wanted to make sure that I tried to implement to all my coaches that we give everybody try to give them the same amount of attention as all the other kids, whether they were good or not. It didn't matter who their parents were or whatnot. We needed to try to be pretty neutral on that and just try to make kids be the best wrestler they could and try to get the best out of them every night.
I think that's important. And it's important for their parents to know, too, that you're trying to do that for their kids.
Right.
Because, sometimes kids don't want to work hard.
Right.
You got to show them, that hard work pays off and you got to work hard, especially in wrestling. You can't cut corners.
We would have a lot of, I would probably the last 10 years that I ran the club, I made every parent try to feel as involved as they could. We had family dinner once a week, usually maybe once a month, and we would, make the kids stand up, introduce themselves like we would in the room, introduce their parents and siblings, and we'd give them a 2-clap, and we always tried to give everybody a chance to talk and have parents give feedback. And we would tell parents, if you have a problem with a coach or a kid that's bugging your kid or whatnot, to address us afterwards, after practice, and we could get things, ironed out. I think overall we did pretty darn good. Communication, I believe, was probably the biggest thing for being a coach, and whether you believed or not what the parents were excited about at the time, you had to be pretty neutral and listen and, again, be a people pleaser, but sometimes you had to tell them, maybe your kid's not ready for wrestling. And
Right.
we had a lot of kids that came through, whose dad was a great wrestler, but a kid would rather be outside playing games or doing something than wrestling. And maybe parents were trying to live vicariously through their children. But yeah, we would make, most of the coaches, I would tell them right away, you're more than welcome to coach, but you got to come in here and coach. And I would put them with a different group besides their kid so that we knew that their interest was not just solely focused on their child, but, to get to know all the other kids and try to help them become better wrestlers in the end.
So you weren't just a coach for Windy City. You were the backside of Windy City and helped the club run. What kind of things did you have to do for that?
Oh, man, that was a big family involvement. Tammy helped me a ton and being organized. And like I said, we'd have a meeting once a week, and we always did a raffle and always made sure that every kid could go to every tournament that they wanted. Money was never an excuse. We implemented a lot of raffles, and I always told parents it doesn't matter if you get all the money in the world or you don't have $10 to your name. If your kid's good enough and wants to pursue wrestling and do that, we can make it happen for him. And we did. We made lots of trips to Iowa and at the end there with a bunch of kids, and we would rent vans, and it became quite the experience, at the end. And it helped me grow as a person and as a wrestler. And, it's funny, when the last couple of years we went to Iowa, I would make the kids, we would rent 2 vans, and whoever was with me, we would make them put their phones in a hat. And we would go around the van and kids would talk what their hobbies were. And a lot of times you don't know that about a kid because they show up ready to wrestle. They're either crying or they're fired up, ready to wrestle and thump on somebody, or they're crying and want back out the door. But in the end there, it became, sentimental to me to get to really know the boys and girls that we took and see just exactly what kind of people they were, what kind of, lifestyle and family style they came from, because you really don't know that a lot when you're seeing the kids an hour and a half a night for 4 nights a week,
Yeah, and it's crazy because you don't know the athletes really well unless you ask those questions. And sometimes wrestling is their outlet, and you don't know that you might be the biggest impact in their life,
Right.
So I think that's important to be able to get to know your athletes and be able to get to know your kids and create those bonds. And then they'll look at you, 30 years from now and be like, that was my coach. What athletes did you have come through your wrestling?
We had a bunch of hammers, through the years. I mean, I can think back when Jason Dye and Scott Beckfield, or not Scott, but his son, Josh, and Cameron Bretts, and Kyle and Jason always stood out in my mind, And then I had my boys had good success. In the end there, as I got towards the end, we really had a bunch of good group of kids, with Jace Palmer and the Krause twins and Alu and all those hammers that were at Kelly Walsh at, I think they got second at state and 2 state championships. And then the last 2 years at NC having them with Cyrus Meeks, and they all just really turned into hammers. And I had told both Coach Peak and Coach Russell that, you guys should be state champs for sure, because we'd hauled them kids around for the last 7-8 years. And even though it takes a full team to win it, a lot of times if you had 6 or 7 hammers, you could really have some success. And they did. I was always just really proud of all them kids winning state, and I think Kelly Walsh had more 4-timers in about a 3-year span than they had, all the previous years before that. I was always, of course, a big advocate for Kelly Walsh since I went there, and used to catch flack from your parents and others that, I would tell parents they have a choice, if I was you, I would send your kid to Kelly Walsh, but I was prejudiced towards that, and the fact that because I was an alumni and my kids went there, that, I believe that they had a better program, and they may not have, and when it came down to it, NC usually beat them most of the time, but I was always an advocate. And then later on, when we had to move to NC, then I did kind of the opposite and tried to be an advocate for NC, to send your kids there, which was hard to do, as you grow and whatnot. And
it's hard to get out of that rivalry.
I know it. And as silly as it sounds, the older you get, it doesn't mean as much as it used to, but it used to be different to have to go to NC to practice some last couple of years that I ran the club, and share a room. But I mean, coaches Russell and at the time Latimer were really good, and they realized that them were your feeder programs for your high school. And, if you're on good communication and good terms with them, it made it pretty easy to be successful in coaching kids, throughout that.
So you mentioned a few people that you coached. How old were they when you coached them? What ages were they?
A lot of them kids, well, we had 2 kids. I can remember Keegan Berry. I worked for, it's funny, I watched the podcast last night with Keegan.
Yeah.
And I had to remember that. I can't remember years a lot, but I can remember I was always been self-employed, and I went to work for Jim Berry that winter. And I would get hesitant about Wednesday and say, hey, back then they had Greco on Friday night, freestyle on Saturday. So I always needed to get off about 1 o'clock or noon on Friday to go to a tournament. The first couple of weeks, Jim's like, oh man, you got to leave again. Well, once I talked him into starting Bridger into it, it was a lot easier because he was going too then. And so it was easier for me to get off of work. And, Keegan Berry started when he was 3, and the only other 3-year-old that comes to mind is Caden Orr. Both of them boys, and parents would ask, how old should my kid be? And I said, well, if they can be attentive for an hour and a half and do what we do and not cry, and, if they aren't nursing, we're in a good spot. And they were successful, you know, and they did real good and became hammers, and it was awesome, you know. And later on, as I became cadet director, you know, we had 2 years there that as a director, we would always gloat amongst us coaches and said, you know, I can remember I had 14 All-Americans in 2 years at Fargo with Bryce Meredith, Arias, and Breckenridge, and Andy McCulley. And I mean, man, them kids were hammers.
Yeah.
They were in big brackets. And, you know, we always called Meredith our golden child because he didn't like Greco, and we would make everybody else wrestle freestyle and Greco, but he didn't want to do Greco. So we always made an exception for him. I remembered the only yellow card I ever received in my life coaching was in Meredith's match, and he was in the semifinals, and this kid kept backing up, and Meredith lost by a point, and I just raised all sorts of heck. When I went to the table, and the young Iowa ref was telling me, shut up, sit down, and I said, don't talk to me that way. Sure enough, when we went out the side of the Fargo Dome after that match, sure enough, there sat that referee, and it was all I could do not to just show him what kind of a wrestler I was. I was so frustrated. It didn't bug me. I got a yellow card. I was just, Meredith should have been a national champ that year and ended up third, and he was all good with it in the end, I guess. But it was pretty crazy, you know, to be involved like that. And I started coaching, I remember the year after Tyler Cox pinned David Taylor. Cox, I think at Tech was 10 then, maybe 15, but he was losing 9-0 or 14-0, whatever it was, and Cox hit him with a headlock and stuck him in the middle of the mat. And I remember I was just floored now, and you look at David Taylor, I mean, my God, that guy's an animal. Champ, Olympic champ, and, you know, he started in Wyoming, and his dad used to take him everywhere. I was just amazed at, you know, how Wyoming kids could compete with other kids around the nation, and going to Fargo to the toughest tournament, I believe, in the U.S., you know, to the success that they had compared to, you know, the exposure other wrestlers had that were from different states, you know. Wyoming did really well, and I miss them days. That was a lot of fun. It was going back to, you know, Fargo. We would stay in the dorms and eat at the thing, and I worked out pretty heavily with them all the time, and took a lot of butt kickings from them and would wrestle them and get them pumped up. But I think that was good in the end. They saw most of us coaches were out there wrestling with them and helping them, and we wanted them to win probably more than they wanted to, if that sounds right. Yeah, them were good memories, you know, and they can't ever take that away from you, and it was always fun. You obviously were the first girl that I coached at Fargo, and I'll never forget that. It was probably as long as I live, and you were the only girl on the bus, if I remember.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would tell the boys, don't be giving her any heck. And I'm sure Briston was there.
Yeah.
And, you know, I said, you guys give her any heck, you guys are going to run, you know. And you made All-American rounds. And I don't know if any boys were in All-American rounds that year, but I can remember you got sixth. And I was standing, I believe your folks were right down at the edge there. And Canadian coach that ended up recruiting you come up and said, is that your girl? And I said, well, yeah, you know, I thought he meant as in coaching you.
Right.
He thought I was your father. And I said, oh, no, I'm not her dad. I said, her parents are sitting right here. Well, I'd like to talk to them about going to wrestle, you know. I said, right here's the people you need to talk to. And I stood back and watched that coach talk to your parents. And that was a big memory in my life, you know, because I thought, wow. We would see lots of college coaches there on the final day, and like a small kid, you would be looking at Cale Sanderson and, you know, Zadok and them all sitting there watching. If Wyoming had somebody in it, that was pretty cool. But, yeah, that was crazy, you know, when that coach recruited you there. I thought that was something else, you know, and I always used to brag about that and had to jog my memory a lot after you had said I was going to be on here. And I can remember distinctly that the year that, I don't know how old you were, maybe 9 or 10, and you were in a bracket, I remember, of 60 kids. And back then, the wrestling team had to pick 12-point getters.
Yeah.
And I was in charge of that. And, you know, they would say, Dillon, did you get our list in? Yep. Who'd you pick? And I'd show them, and I picked you. You picked Jess? Yep. I said, man, she's in a bracket of 60 or 70 kids. She'll be top 3, man. She's a hammer. We're gonna win it. You know, we won a lot of state titles, but I'll never forget. We had 6 or 7 kids, and I know Zach and Nick were both in the finals, and you were, and other kids, and we were all in a row on a mat. And I can remember you wrestled Ladke from Lusk, and you thumped him, and they kept stopping the match for this or that, and I was just throwing a fit. And I was a pretty radical coach back then, you know, and probably a little more vocal than I needed to be, but I can remember Tammy yelling at me over the railing, hey, shut up. You still got kids to coach, and they're ready to give me a yellow card or a red card. And I can remember when you thumped him and ended up third, and man, I was pumped up. And I mean, it was exciting, you know, and a lot of people disliked you because of that, because, girls shouldn't be wrestling boys, you know, and I believe that turned and made you into the person you are today. There were 3 girls that stick out in my mind. Sarah Tolan was the first one. And I can remember Don telling me, yeah, Sarah's going to wrestle. And I said, you are out of your mind. And he's like, nah, you know, make sure she gets a practice partner. Nobody wanted to practice with her. And so that was really tough. And then you, of course, and then I can remember going to Western Regionals all the time. And Michaela Hutchinson out of Alaska, there was the Hutchinson family, and I became good friends with her father. And we would talk at Western Regionals and then later on at Fargo all the time. And Zach used to wrestle Eli, one of his boys. And all them kids were hammers. But, you know, I believe I saw a podcast the other night with her, and she had won a Alaska State championship, you know, and that was pretty unheard of for a girl to win a championship in a boys bracket back then. And I mean, man, I used to feel bad, you know, as a coach. Girls would lose to guys, and I'd think, well, that's okay, you know, I mean, they're more developed in this and that and other, but it always felt good when you guys beat somebody that had a little bit of notoriety to them, that, you know, and it was fun to talk you up and run my mouth more than probably I should, but I was always really good at that, so I never knew when to shut up, but I really enjoyed that. And then as I've watched you grow into the lady and become the lady you are now, and just what a big advocate you were to get girls wrestling into Wyoming. I mean, I was proud as your coach when you were talking about kids being, that you see later on as I got to the end of my coaching career, a lot of kids were showing up with their kids that I had coached. And, you know, like you said, this used to be my coach, and I always like that. And to this day, I still see a lot of men around that, you know, call me coach, and that makes me feel good inside. Their kids have now gone through, you know, and then you start to think, man, I'm getting old. 15, 18, 20-year-old kids that used to be 3 or 4 or 5 that wrestled in their club, and here they are with, you know, wives and getting ready to have kids, and think, good Lord, I'm going to have to get out one of these years, but I just can't. I've enjoyed the ride as long as I've been on it. Not ready to get out anytime soon, but I don't miss running practices at all, and that was tough because we practiced 4 nights a week at Windy City, you know, and the last few years when Nick and I did the club, man, he turned a bunch of kids, well, all those K-Dub and NC kids for 5-year span there, that he turned them into a bunch of hammers, you know, and then he went on to Glen Rock and coached, and the best Glen Rock ever did for 3 or 4 years, and I think he had 2 or 3 4-timers through him, and my God, he was just awesome, and he would come prepared every night with a practice schedule, and he was teaching me back then, you know, a lot of things, and he was watching a lot of different practices and how they did, and, you know, now Nick refs, and I think he's one of the best refs in the state.
I agree.
Watching, I mean, that kid's on it, and he's very vocal, and just, you know, makes me proud to stand back and watch him referee now.
He's definitely a good ref, and he was a good coach when he was with Windy City for sure, and with Glen Rock. I like to see, you know, you guys all giving back to the sport, and, you know, me continuing to do this stuff for the sport, and seeing you 30 years later when I'm done wrestling, and you were coaching me, and I still call you coach, and I still got that Windy City pride.
Yeah, I love that Windy City pride.
Yeah, every single time I make any post, Windy City pride.
Yeah.
I love it. You're gonna have all those kids that are always gonna remember you and the impact you made in the sport, and especially at that age, it's super important.
Right.
But then, coaching wise, what kind of coaching style do you think you had?
I was, pretty aggressive, and we were a lot about the basics, and we would coach, and at the end of the night we would go out and we would tell parents, tonight we worked on double egg and half, and so you go home and either show your mom or your dad or your sister just exactly what we did. And I felt that was necessary to go out and have communication with all the parents and tell them this is what we've done with your kid. Of course, we always ran a closed practice, and parents became really nervous right away if they couldn't be in there and watch. And we, of course, explained that's going to be a distraction. You can't be in here, and we'll take care of them. And if they don't act up and behave like we want them to, they'll come out and sit with you, Of course, we were just aggressive, and, I would get them kids fired up. And when we'd have parents meetings, I'd tell them, we're in this to mash some ass. And the parents would be deer in the headlights, like, I can't believe that coach just said that. Once them parents got to 1 or 2 tournaments and they got a taste of it, man, it just kind of rolled. And for a lot of years there, Windy City was known for, we had a lot of dads who, and as I grew older, I started where they were, but they were aggressive, and man, if their kid lost, I could sure whip your dad's butt, outside. And we watched, parents, especially fathers, live vicariously through their kids. And so the more experience I had, I would tell coaches, you got to control your emotions and just funnel that in through your kids. We had a lot of dads that would stand back behind our kids when we'd wrestle, and a lot of parents, I think, were intimidated from different clubs because they were a bunch of hellion dads that were ready to fight at a drop of a hat if their kid lost or lost a bad call or whatnot, and I would tell coaches in our coaches meetings that we'd have, like after we would be done with a tournament that Monday, the kids would come in, and if we had to hand out medals or they had them, we always made sure every kid stood up, told us their name, what tournament they went to, how well they did, and we'd give them a 2 clap, and every coach would try to elaborate a little bit on each one. And we tried to make all kids feel accepted into our club, whether they had good luck. And we had a lot of kids that didn't win. I remember Michael Emery didn't win a match for a year, and I thought, man, I'd have quit by now. He kept going and finally had success towards the end of his career. And, but I thought it was always important to keep everybody involved, from brothers to sisters to parents when we would have like I said, our family dinners. And I can remember Maddie, my daughter, would always go to Fargo, and she hated going to the tournaments, but they had them Dippin' Dots up top. So I would give her $20, and man, she would be set. And as I hosted kids more over the years for Fargo, she became acquainted with a lot of them, and I mean, nowadays we can't go anywhere where we don't run into somebody that we know, from wrestling.
Right.
And our relatives and friends we know that we've been around, we always run into somebody somewhere in the state. And we flew to Alaska a couple of years ago, got off the plane in Seattle, and I see this big group of people, and this guy's waving at me, and I walk over, and they're from Idaho going hunting in Alaska somewhere, and I had known and got acquainted with his wrestling team from Idaho. And, the kids were kind of couldn't believe that I knew somebody up in Seattle through wrestling, and we just happened to cross paths, memories you can't give up, and you'll always run into people throughout the state, and my dad never really cared for wrestling whatsoever. I can remember when Nick and Zach made the finals as juniors and freshmen in high school, and that year is the first year they didn't show the finals on K2 TV. And all of my relatives in Montana were coming down. I told them, nope, it's going to be on TV. And gosh dang, end up not showing it, and I was just devastated. And Zach lost. He was a freshman and lost to Con from Sheridan, who was a senior, on a controversial call. 2 points, and Nick lost to Harmon from Green River by a point. And I can remember that made me a hard-hearted man for a lot of years, and we would always talk about, a lot of parents would always say, oh, the ref screwed my kid.
Right.
Well, I've only seen 4 or 5 matches where probably a ref really screwed the kid, and I can remember Zach losing, and if Nick wouldn't have been coming up in the finals, I'd probably still be in prison because I was so angry when he lost and devastated. And whether I was living vicariously through my kids or not, man, it just turned me into a different person. And I think my competitiveness went tenfold there after that, and it made me a better coach, I think, in the long run, because no matter what, we would tell our kids, you can't leave it up to the ref. If you do, and you lose, what can we say? And if you're on your back and you get called pinned, we can't do anything about it. For a lot of years, I was hard-hearted, and I was a jerk to a lot of people. A lot of people either liked me or they hated me, and I'm sure more hated me than liked me. But as I grew older and to the end, I became, a different, more subtle coach, I guess you could say. I was still intense when I coached the kids, but I had a little different aspect and outlook on, the results, and knew that winning and losing wasn't everything in life. Is, a lot of parents, I believe, think that's the only thing, about it all, and don't realize the camaraderie and the friends that you make through wrestling.
There's coaches that coach youth clubs. What is the best advice they would give to them?
Probably to have an open mind, and, to have a big understanding and realize one kid's going to be a lot better than the next one down the loop. And whether it takes them 2 years to get the hang of it or that kid catches on, you got to be patient with all them, and got to be loving, to all them boys and girls that are wrestling in your club, because, they're in a different atmosphere, different sport. A lot of them never had to do a sport that's them against somebody else.
Right.
They're all used to team sports, and once it's a one-on-one, it's a whole different lifestyle. Coaches got to be able to accept the wins with the losses and make that kid a better person, and I can remember distinctively when I would coach Billy and Brett and them, and I can remember we were in Iowa, and Billy had lost, and he was hurt, said he was, and crying a little bit. And at the end of my coaching, we would, slap hands before the beginning of the match. And at the end, they'd come over, and I'd always make them give me a hug. I'd tell them I love them. And then if their parents were pissed or wound them up in the stands right away, I would tell them. And Billy was a good example. Your mom had texted me and said, send Billy up here. And I said, you need to stay by Coach Dillon for a while because your mom's mad, and you just stay here, okay, because I love you. And once, the excitement and the adrenaline got out of everybody, then after 15 minutes, I told Billy, well, you better go see what your mom wants.
Yeah.
And used to give your mom a lot of heck about being, too rough on your kid. It wasn't life or death, but first minute or two after the match is over, a lot of feelings and emotions are running through kids and parents. And I would always try to make, the kids that wrestled, whether they won or lost, try to make them stay by me and watch other kids. And that was another thing we always tried to push as a club. Just because your kid goes 2-0 doesn't mean you leave the tournament. I said, if your kid's still in the tournament, wouldn't you want your team here rooting for them? And, some parents had a good excuse. They had to work or this or that, or if we weren't spending the night or whatever. But I think that opened a lot of parents' eyes. It was more than just a one-on-one sport, when we were trying to make the team sport about it, saying, you've got to stay around or try to stay around and be supportive of everybody in the club. And I think that got a lot of unity between all of us as a club and club members, to get to know each other better. And of course, we'd always go out to Pizza Hut or somewhere after a tournament and go and eat and reserve the whole place and raise hell and eat some pizza, and down the road we'd go, But I think in the long run that helped everybody. At the end, I got more analytical about it and would try to break down all the kids that wanted to listen and see what they needed to do to get better and work on. And, I know I impacted a lot of kids and parents, and I would tell parents it's your job also to go home and try to help your kid get better, whether they have a sibling or you need to get on your hands and knees and let them work a move. Getting better doesn't end when they walk out this door, And so I believe that was a big impact. And I know I had a lot of impact on a lot of kids over that, and made kids into grown men and women that, became the people they are today.
So you're the reason that Briston would make me get on my hands and knees in the middle of the living room at night, show my parents the moves he's working on.
Yeah.
I see where it comes from.
Yeah. I remember when you guys came to the club, him and Zach were 5 pounds apart, and him and Zach were great practice partners. And I have to laugh because I think Briston won state twice. And, Nick and Zach, they didn't ever win state. They were runner-up 2 times. And one day Zach said to me, Dad, you don't have to be a state champ to be a good guy. Look at how we've turned out, and that really hit me because, like I said, I call them my cold years, when I was pretty hard-hearted about my kids winning and losing. As I look back now, man, they were right. I think it hurt me more to see them lose than it hurt them. I mean, and you knew that sometimes you just didn't get all the potential out of the kids that you wanted, So, yeah, it turned out all right.
When did you start with the Wyoming Amateur Wrestling Association?
Man, I was trying to think driving here, I was first elected as media rep before we really had a website or anything. Well, to this day, I still don't know how to run a computer. I have a hard enough time running my phone. And my wife, Tammy, was totally responsible for that. And when I would give the speech at the state meeting, I would say, whatever you want to put on, just let me know. Tammy does a really good job at it. And I gave her all the recognition. And I think I was that for 2 years, and then I became cadet director, and I don't remember if I was 6 years or 8 years director, but I mean, we took off between Sean Crothers and I and Zach Helgeson. I mean, we had bus loads going to Fargo, and we had a bunch of hammers, and we really became advocates for wrestling, and we would go to all the big tournaments every weekend in high school, and we would recruit like no other. I mean, we turned it into a business, and said, we got to have you guys. You guys are good for Fargo. A lot of kids I would see that, especially up north, a lot of them, their parents were farmers, and they wouldn't allow their kids to go because it was summertime and time to work,
Right.
And we'd do everything in the world we could to get them kids to come to Fargo. That's why we had such great numbers for so many years. And the years you and Briston went, we had, like I said, a busload of hammers, and we always came home with 1 or 2 All-Americans, if not more.
So what position are you now?
Open director.
Open director.
Yeah, and so if you're 20 and above, have a $2,000 budget.
Okay.
You can hit me up. My phone number is 307-267-0274. And if we have guys that go to Vegas and wrestle usually, and that's where we usually give money to them, and then you have a certain deadline that we'll set on the web page that Kelly Jo Allison does, and then we will distribute money to whoever it is deemed to after we get it, all applications in. But we only used to have a $500 budget, and then we got it raised to $2,000. We have some money there to give out to guys to help alleviate the costs for tournaments that they want to go to and wrestle in the open.
Yeah, I'm sure that's important for them to know. I think a lot of people don't know that they can get money from the Wyoming Amateur Wrestling Association board. And if you guys are interested, you're going to wrestle in Vegas, you're going to wrestle in any open tournament, you're over 20, definitely hit Kevin up. He needs to give that money out to people. So that's definitely a good person to talk to if you are wrestling in any of those tournaments. So Kevin, is there anything else that you'd like to add or say to anybody wanting to either start wrestling or currently is wrestling?
I'd say definitely check it out. As a club, we used to allow kids to come the first week, and if they didn't like it, we gave them their money back. We didn't have to give money back too much, And parents have also got to realize, a big factor always was parents would say, well, we're going to practice but not go to a tournament. Well, the tournament's pretty much like the reward for their hard work for the week of practice. And that's how you start to judge your kid, and they get their eyes open at what kind of competition is out there. And parents have to realize that when you're in, man, you're in. The farther you go, the better you're going to do, I believe.
Right.
And it's not all about wins and losses, and creating family time and club time and getting to know all the people that through wrestling. It'll all stick with you the rest of your life. Like I said, I've been really proud of you for as good as you've done, and just like to sit back and listen and watch you. And at the board meeting there, when you rattled off all the tournaments you were going to this year, I thought, good Lord, there's a lot of tournaments. But I mean, that's why you're having the success you are, and the numbers of, I don't know how many times, tripled or whatever for the state. And like I said, I'm proud of you, and just, I guess I take good pride in that, because you were a girl that I first started coaching, and here you are, turned into a nice woman that, has all the drive in the world to make all these girls better, and them girls love you. And I see the team camaraderie that you have with NC and all them girls and your posts, and they all have smiles on their face, and I like watching you get fired up as a coach and then turning around and being their friend,
Yeah, it's fun. I appreciate that. And, I learned how to coach, from somewhere. So, it was good going from, being an athlete at 5 years old in your wrestling room to, seeing you watching me coach. Now it's come full circle. And I love that we were able to have those moments and those memories. And they're definitely something I'm going to take with me. That match you were talking about at the event center, I can remember that. That was one of my favorite memories ever.
Yeah.
And, the whole crowd in the event center of all places was just going wild. And that was really cool. And I was happy to have you in my corner at that time.
Yeah. You raised the roof that day.
Yeah. That was fun.
You helped me save face, because you were a big point getter, for us. And we won state that year as a club. And, I think we were still pink and black as colors before we turned to silver and black. And we were the only team in the state that was tough enough to wear pink back then, before it ever became like a thing,
Yep.
I'm glad to see that you have this podcast and get all these different girls highlighted.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty neat, and follow you on Instagram. And I finally got set up last night with the help of Tammy to see these podcasts, because I didn't know how. I just saw the little snips that show on Instagram. I'm like, how do you watch the whole thing? And there again, I'm not the wisest on figuring that stuff out, but I'm definitely a big fan of it now, So I think it's awesome, all the work that you've done and everything you've done for the state. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I definitely will. And for those of you that don't know how to watch my podcast or follow my podcast, you can always go to Spotify. We're on there, Wrestle Her Podcast. We're on YouTube, Wrestle Her Podcast. We're on all of the streaming platforms that you can listen to any podcasts. And then we have our Facebook and our Instagram. It's just Wrestle Her Podcast. So check those out. Kevin, if they want to get in touch with you or find you to ask any wrestling questions, where would they get a hold of you?
My email address is kcdillon@hotmail.com, or you'll probably have better luck calling me at 307-267-0274.
Well, I'm just going to leave you guys on a little wrestling quote here, and then we'll get out of here. So it says, I am a coach because of the kids and the passion I have for the sport itself. There is no other feeling quite like helping young athletes further develop their natural persistence, determination, discipline, dedication, resiliency, work ethic, heart, leadership, skills, connection with others, and respect for others, but not only in competition, but in life. And that was from Coach's Training Room. So I like that because we're both in the coaching world now. We're we were both athletes at one point, but I think it's important to be in coaching for the right reasons, and the kids are those reasons.
Right.
So I like that you talked about how your favorite memories, were being there for your kids, being there for the kids that you coached, seeing the kids 30 years later to say, hey, what's up, coach? That's the main reason that a lot of people coach. I just wanted to leave on that quote. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or say to the listeners today?
I don't. If you think your kid wants to wrestle, man, give them a chance. And obviously there's a lot of programs in town here that they can start at, and one club may not fit your desire, your expectations, but the next one might, and start with Windy City and go from there.
Windy City Pride.
That's right. Windy City Pride, baby.
All right. Well, thanks, Kevin, so much for joining me today. And thank you guys so much for joining us on this podcast today. We will see you guys next time. Bye.
I can't accept the loss, I'm hard-headed. There's a little bit of madness to my method. Many falling off that fine line that I'm treading. I risk anything to be great, and I'm not letting nobody rob me of my victory. Number one, that's what I'm meant to be. When by any means, only thing that makes sense to me, I can make nice or make history.